Hello everyone, and welcome to this Blender tutorial, my very first Blender tutorial on how to create a simple PBR shader in Blender, specifically in Blender Cycles. Now, for those of you who are not aware of what PBR is, to put it simply, it is physically based rendering, and what that means essentially is that your materials for your objects will reflect light off their surfaces the way they would in the real world. Um, and this is done primarily using Fresnel, where the closer to the edge of an object you get, the more reflective it is, and the more you are in the center, the less reflective it is. And right here you can see I've got this sphere with the material that we are going to make set up. Ugh. With all these nice little sliders that control both the roughness, the reflection, and some extra goodies that I will get into. Alright, without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and start a new Blender file. And the first thing you want to do is go ahead and add in a sphere. So you can do that by hitting Shift-A, Mesh, and go down here to UV Sphere. I like to bring it up above the grid floor. Bring up my Tools panel right here. Hit Smooth under Shading. And then go ahead and hit Control 1 on your keyboard to add one level of subdivision surface. You can also do that by going over here to the wrench and clicking on that and adding in a subsurf modifier, which it automatically does with the Control 1 shortcut. Okay, the next thing you want to do is go ahead and drag your crosshairs over here and create a separate window. I'm going to go ahead and switch this over to the node editor, which is where we're going to be making our material. Make sure you're in the Cycles render engine. I have Blender set up so that it's the default engine one that Blender has on startup. Alright, also if you have a graphics card, make sure it's set to GPU compute. It will just make your render times a little bit faster. And what else? Go over to World Panel, and not always, but sometimes this will ask you to, there will be a button here that will ask you to use nodes. So just go ahead and click it if it does, and you'll get something that looks like this. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is we're just going to go ahead down here and create a new material. And it creates a default diffuse kind of material. And the next thing you want to do is you want to grab you want to set up some lighting for your scene. So what I'm going to do is use an HDRI image. So I'll go over here to World tab right here and add in under Texture, Environment Texture. When you go to Open, go ahead and add in this texture right here. I'll go ahead and add a link for this in the description. But it's just sky light blue.jpg. Go ahead and plug that in. Turn the strength up to 2. And the next thing you want to do is over here under the world settings, go ahead and scroll down. And under settings, make sure multiple importance is turned on. It's turned off by default, but I have Blender set up so that it's always turned on. Alright, so with that we can begin making our material. go to the material settings right here. And actually, before I go any further, I do want to give credit where credit is due, because I did not come up with this system on my own. So if we go over to here, these two videos are basically how I learned how to do this. So the first one here is by a YouTuber, Cinecat Pro, and this is his video, Blender Physically Based Shading fornell. And the next video is from someone that everyone who uses Blender should be familiar with, Andrew Price from Blender Guru, and his video is how to make photorealistic PBR materials Part 1. I'll include links for these in the description below. Go and check those out, because they go in a lot more depth than I'm about to do. But if you're just looking for like just a quick, simple way to come up with PBR materials, then by all means continue watching. Alright, so let's go ahead and add in the components for our PBR material. So the first thing we're going to need is a glossy, obviously. And the next thing we're going to need is a mix shader. Okay, and go ahead and connect those up. I'm adding materials to the grid by hitting Shift A on the keyboard. Another way to do it is just to go down here to Node, or go down here to Add, and it gives you all these different things to add. You can also do it over here. It gives you all the different nodes that you can add. So like if we want to add in a fornell, we just go here to Input, the Input tab, and then click on fornell right here, and we can like drag that over. Alright, so here's going to be our fornell. Now what we want to do now is set up a group. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift Spacebar in this with my cursor in this window, and that's just going to expand it so that we have more room to work with. And I'm going to go ahead and right-click on my fornell. I'm going to bring up my Properties panel by hitting on the N key. And then with my fornell node selected, I'm going to hit Control G. And this is going to create a group with my fornell node in it, and it's already going to create, and it's going to create these inputs and outputs for it as well, which is really handy. So now what we need to do is we need to come up with a system where we're going to be able to control the amount of fornell and the amount of reflection that we're going to want on our materials. So the way I'm going to show you is going to be different from Cinecat Pro's and from Andrew Price's way, but it still works about the same, and for me, and at least, it's a little bit simpler to understand. So let's just go ahead and do it. First thing I'm going to do is add in a mix color node, and they've changed the order of these nodes since the last update. All right, go ahead and take the factor all the way down to 0 right here, and go ahead and connect it onto this empty input right here. Then over here, where in the Properties panel where it says Factor, go ahead and select that. Then in the name, call it Roughness. Alright, now right here, this color is going to be very important, so go ahead and click on that. And right now we are in HSV, and right here under the value, you want that to be 0.2. Alright. You can also make it a little darker if you want. I actually prefer it to be a little darker, but it's ultimately up to you. For now, we're just going to stick with 0.2 because that's the value of reflection when you are 100% facing an object's surface is 0.2. So that's going to be important. All right. So we've got something to control our roughness. The next thing we're going to want is something to control the amount of reflection that we're getting. So we're going to go ahead and we can either add a new mix node, or we can just duplicate this one that we already have by hitting Shift D. And just go ahead and move it over, and it should just pop right into position. And go ahead and make this color pure white. And go ahead and take the factor over into this empty input over here. Make sure everything is organized. You can also go ahead and add in some reroute nodes to just make things a little neater. Alright, and over where it says factor over here, go ahead and change that to roughness. Or I'm sorry, reflection. Alright, once you're done with that, go ahead and select the normals up here at the top and just move that to the bottom. It's, it doesn't have to be at the bottom, but I like putting it there just for organization. You can straighten these out by hitting scale, Y, and 0. So now they're perfectly aligned to one another. Alright, so once you're done, go ahead and hit Tab, and here we have our nice little fornell group. So go ahead and rename that over here in the properties. Just type in fornell, and you're good to go. We're ready to continue on. So the next thing we want to do is create a separate group for our specularity, essentially. But first, let me show you what happens when we plug this in. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that into the factor right here, and I'm going to change the color of my sphere to red. Now I'm going to exit out of the full screen right here by hitting Shift Spacebar again. And over here, I'm going to hit Shift-Z to go into real-time render. And there we have our sphere. And we can see the fornell node is already taken effect, and it looks great. The only thing is we want our roughness right here to be 0 because we want to align with our roughness up here. Alright, and we're going to do that in the next step right here. So go ahead and Shift-Z out of that, or Shift-Z out of that, and go ahead and hit Shift Spacebar in here to expand the window. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and select this and this, and hit Control-G again. We're going to create a new group, and go ahead and just plug these into the group inputs right here. Now where it says normal, we're going to take that down and plug it into the normal of our glossy. And where it says roughness, we're going to do the same thing for the roughness on the glossy node as well. Make sure this is pure white. And pretty much done for right there. The one thing I will do is I will switch these around. So I'll go up here and I'll just select the factor and hit the up arrow to move it up. Just makes it a little cleaner, a little more organized, and we're going to tab out of that. So now we've got this really nice node that's going to basically control all of our reflections, and I'll show you how that works here in a minute. But go ahead and change the name of this. I like to change it to something like specularity, but you can change it to whatever you want, reflections, reflectivity, just whatever makes sense to you. Alright, so we're going to tab out of that, and we're going to see this in action. So we're going to go ahead and hit Shift-Z, and we can see if we increase the roughness here, the object becomes more diffuse. And if we go ahead and increase the reflections, the object obviously becomes more reflective. And we can get a lot of nice different effects with this. It's very cool. Alright, so with that done, go ahead and select these three right here and hit Control G again and plug the color of your diffuse up here at the top. Then plug in your IOR, your index of refraction, your roughness, your reflection, and then your normal. And plug that normal right there. And be sure to have this selected before you tab out, otherwise you'll just go directly into whatever node group you have selected. So make sure your group input node is selected and then hit tab, and there we go. We got a nice little PBR shader. So go ahead and rename that. I'm just going to call this one PBR Simple. Now we can get a little more detailed with this, and that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and add in some subsurface scattering options to this as well, so you can make even more complex materials like wax, or organic materials like leaves and trees and stuff like that. Or maybe not those specifically, but you know what I'm saying. So go ahead and tab back into your group and go ahead and select this and duplicate it, bring it over here, make sure the factor is turned down all the way to 0, bring it over to your input right here, and let's go ahead and rename that diffuse /SSS, subsurface scattering. Alright, and once you're done with that, go ahead and add in a subsurface scattering node. So it's going to be under shader, right there. Go ahead and plug that in, and they've gone ahead and made some changes. This is apparently the default right now. This is my first time seeing this since downloading the latest version of Blender. So I guess sharpness was not that important anymore, I guess. Well, whatever. I barely used it anyway. I didn't know what it did. Anyway, off topic. So go ahead and take your color and plug it into the color right here. And then do the same thing. Then take your scale, plug it in right there, your radius, plug it in right there, your texture blur right there, and your normal, go ahead and pull that down and plug it into the normal of your subsurface scattering. And then when you're done with that, go ahead and select the normal up here in your properties, and then move that to the bottom. And then make sure this group is selected, hit tab to tab out, and there we go. It is, for all intents and purposes, done. We have a really simple PBR shader that gives us all this control. So if we go into here, and if I go ahead and play around with the subsurface scattering, we can see some considerable changes to the mesh. If I go ahead and increase the roughness a bit, we can see it's starting to look very soft, very fleshy. Also, if I increase the scale just a bit, like by 1.5 or whatever, we can see more light is beginning to scatter on the surface. So if I make this like a more flesh tone color, something like that. For the radius, if I go ahead and add in I think it's input, is it value? No, not value. RGB node, and make that like a Make a deep orange and plug that into the radius right here. All while increasing the SSS. Just make it pure subsurface scattering, and increase the scale a bit more. We can see that that we can get little glimpses of that deep orange in there, especially if I go ahead and just increase the samples to something like 128 in the preview. And of course, we can get pretty wild by adding more reflection. It kind of looks like a pearl now, which is pretty cool. But yeah, so you can pretty much you know, create a whole bunch of different materials just from this simple setup right here. Now again, this isn't perfect, and if I were to be completely honest, I'd probably just stick with the setups that Andrew Price and Cinecat Pro have for their materials. But I feel like this one works well enough, and it's really simple, really easy to follow, really easy to edit if you want to make some changes to it. So I think as far as a simple setup goes, this is garnering pretty decent results, and yeah, feel free to use this as you will. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for my first Blender tutorial. Let me know what you thought of it, and if you want me to do any more. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.